On this episode of the Catholic Echo podcast from the Diocese of Youngstown, we're talking about the Sacrament of Holy Orders with Bishop David Bonnar and newly ordained Father William Wainio. Find more about this episode's topic, including articles from the Catholic Echo at catholicecho.org/podcast. And now the host of the Catholic Echo podcast, Father Jim Corda.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Echo podcast. I'm your host, Father Jim Corda. Our show is brought to you by the annual Diocesan Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and Cumulus Media Youngstown. Joining me is Bishop David Bonnar. Welcome again to our show.
Thank you so much, Father Corda. It is always a joy to be here.
We're going to talk about a sacrament that is near and dear to your heart and my heart, and that's the Sacrament of Holy Orders. What I'd like us to do is kind of take a trip down memory lane. You, as a blessing, have received all three orders within the Sacrament of Holy Orders. I've received two of them. What I'd like us to both do is to kind of go back in years to remember our ordination as a deacon. I know that my ordination as a deacon, which took place 46 years ago, was really a blessing because it was the first time that I was really involved with ministry in the church. And there were a lot of us priests around. There were a lot of examples of holy priests. Is that the same for you when you go back those years to your diaconate?
I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for all the priests that I've met along the way who were models and examples. My diaconate ordination is something that is forever engraved in my heart. It happened in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome at the altar of the chair. And I was ordained with all of my Roman classmates. And my mom and dad were there, along with a good number of people from my home parish, which was really important to me because those two entities really represented the roots of my vocation, my family and my parish life, the parish upbringing. That was an experience that I'm reminded of every year on April 14th because it really involved a life change.
Let's go back to both of our ordinations as priests. I can remember mine vividly. I can tell you where everyone sat. I can tell you the priests that were there. I could tell you about the homily that was preached that day, the reception that followed, and my first few years as a newly ordained priest. Those things are very vivid to me. Talk about your ordination day as a priest, and what are those memories that bring back to you?
Well, my ordination was unique in that it did not happen in the cathedral. Because I was a Roman student, our academic year did not end until late June. And the other seminaries, my classmates from my diocese, they were finished towards the end of April, beginning of May. And I think the bishop wanted to put them right to work, and understandably so. I was ordained by myself in my home parish church. And so what I remember about that was that the evening before we had a Vesper service, because I had friends in from out of town and family members. We had a nice little picnic in the backyard, but then I went and stayed in the rectory that evening. And when I woke up that next morning, I was overwhelmed. I was on the verge of tears because it hit me that my life was going to change significantly. I was really embracing a dramatic change. And I'll never forget, right before the Mass began, the bishop called me into a conference room in the rectory. We had all vested over in the rectory. And he closed the door, and all he said to me was this. He said, "Dave, thank you for giving your life to the church." I've never forgotten that, and it's something that I've echoed now as a bishop to the men that I'm so honored and blessed to ordain, because it is a gift. I mean, the vocation is a gift, but the man himself has to give of himself.
Let's talk a little bit more about the ordination and you as a bishop being ordained a few years ago and then serving as our ordinary here in the Diocese of Youngstown have obviously had the opportunity to extend ordination and the gift of priesthood to many of our young people. Let's talk about that gift because it really is a gift. I remember my ordination as a priest, and I remember the bishop telling my mother, because she told me this, that he thanked her and my father for giving me to the church. And so there's that blessing, there's that gift that parents have in giving their children to God, especially for us as priests. Why is it important for us to have that support of family and friends when we embark on holy priesthood?
The support of family is just something that is so critical. And it's important because while no one, and our bishop used to say this at the ordinations, he would say, no one arrives at the altar alone. But no one does their ministry alone. There needs to be a foundational support. There needs to be a place where you can go and just be and know that you're loved and know that you're cared for and supported. And that's where family comes in. When I was vocation director, one of the real challenges for men in discernment was, for some, their parents did not want them to be priests. Sure. They didn't want to behold that gift and share that gift.
As you were talking, one thing that comes to mind is what a blessing other priests have been to me, and I'm sure other priests have been to you. If there are two hallmarks of a healthy, happy priesthood, it's prayer and it's having the blessing of other priest friends, because that is the support that we get from each other. I belong to a priest support group, and we've been together for well over 30 years now. And so we've seen many of those priests in our group pass away. We've welcomed new people into our group, but it's an opportunity for us to gather on a monthly basis to share fellowship, to share prayer, but also to share the blessing of our own priesthood. One of the things that I always like to recall is that when we were ordained priests, the bishop blesses our hands with holy oil. One of the things we do right after that is wash that oil off. But how do we keep that oil fresh over these many years? I've been ordained 45 years. You have been ordained many years. How do we keep that oil, that holy chrism, fresh on our hands as a priest?
For me, what's kept it fresh has been a faith-filled life of prayer, along with relationships, family, friends, but also priest friends. Because, we are sent to do the work of Jesus, to do the work of the church. It's comforting to know, even while many of our priests live alone, there is a solidarity. I remember on the day of my ordination receiving a card from another priest who just simply wrote in the card, "Dear Dave, welcome to the greatest fraternity in the world." So I think belonging to a presbyterate and participating in the life of the presbyterate is yet another way that oil, that sacred chrism, can remain fresh in our hands.
Let's, in our last few minutes of our time together, talk about the role of the folks that are with us listening. What is their role when we're talking about the sacrament of holy orders? We know that it's us who are ordained. It's men who are ordained to the diaconate, the priesthood, and the episcopacy. But what is the laity's role in the sacrament of holy orders?
The laity has a role to encourage and promote vocations, but also to support those vocations through prayer and through words of encouragement. We all have feet of clay. None of us are perfect. But by God's grace, we are what we are. And I know as a priest, and even more so now as a bishop, I rely upon the prayers of the people of God. I find it interesting that when our Holy Father, Pope Francis, became Pope, his first actions, when he stood on that ledge looking out at the city of Rome and the entire world, was that he asked everyone to pray for him. We all need prayers. We all need to be lifted up so that the work we do is truly of God.
Amen. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
The Catholic Echo is the media arm of the Catholic Diocese of Youngstown, and it seeks to inform and entertain Catholics in our 6-county diocese by forging stronger connections to our parish communities and highlighting the many blessings of Catholic life in our region. If you have a story idea for the Catholic Echo magazine, podcast, or website, send an email to catholicecho@youngstowndiocese.org. We'd love to hear your ideas.
With me is Father William Wainio. Welcome to our show.
Thanks. Good to be here.
First of all, congratulations. You were just ordained yesterday to the priesthood. It's a wonderful day and a great celebration, and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It was an outstanding day with so many family and friends and supporters from across the diocese. It really shows that our church is still well alive.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but today we're talking about the sacrament of holy orders. And so you just come off being a deacon and now a priest, I'd like to take some steps back and talk about what led up to your ordination to the diaconate, first of all. And we're going to talk about the diaconate too. But let's give a little background into your journey into priesthood.
Sure. So, of course, discernment and seminary formation, big part of what led up to ordination as a deacon. I had completed 6 years in the seminary by the time I was ordained a deacon last year. And, in seminary formation, you cover everything from the deep roots of theology, topics in philosophy and how to think, how to argue, things like that, because it really does help you form then how to explain the mystery. And, a lot of people look at the church and say, well, they don't know what they're talking about. Well, it's hard to explain a mystery. But in different classes on the Trinity and the Eucharist and liturgy, a whole wide variety of things, you really do learn how to become more intimate with that mystery and then how to explain it to others. So that was a big part leading up to it. And of course, in that, a lot of prayer and discernment. So talking with a formation advisor, talking with the spiritual director, what's going on in the day-to-day life? What do I feel God is calling me to do? How am I building upon the foundation that had been laid for years before entering the seminary? How am I building upon that to succeed? How am I changing? You should never, I don't think any man should go into the seminary and come out the same person.
Right.
Formation didn't work at that point. That was a big deal of what led up to diaconate ordination, and, it was a great blessing. I mean, I loved every minute of it. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad I'm on the other side of it now because I'm really ready to minister as a priest.
Sure. Well, I kind of look at the diaconate, and basically it's a year for transitional deacons primarily to have that diaconate experience. And I look upon it as being formed and informed, as you had mentioned. It's a time to be informed on the doctrines and the mysteries of the faith, to immerse yourself into the history of the church academically, but it's also a time to be formed through the Spirit into that order of diaconate and eventually priesthood. But it's also a fun time because you don't have those administrative responsibilities as you do now as a priest. And so it's a time to really enjoy ministry. What did you enjoy most about the diaconate?
Baptizing children. Just what a whirlwind. I've always told people I want to be a priest because I want to bring the sacraments to God's people. And of course, a deacon has the great blessing to be able to witness marriages, baptize children and adults, bring communion to the sick, the homebound, visit the sick, visit the hospitals. But one of the best things was the first baptism I had, I'll always remember. And I've had about 8 or 9 as a deacon. I've been blessed that during my assignment, which was in downtown Canton at the Basilica of St. John the Baptist and St. Peter's in downtown Canton, we had a number of baptisms. And my pastor, Father Misbrenner, really helped by saying, well, you better take it. It's a good experience. And it was. Every one of them was a good experience, from, the baby that laughed the whole time and the baby that screamed and cried because they didn't know what was happening. Sure. But to be there with a family that has probably brought people to church that haven't been there in a while to witness this moment and to see the joy in the parents, godparents, grandparents' faces, really just heartwarming and really kind of amazing. The Spirit working through you has now brought someone else into God's church. It's really powerful.
It's interesting as you were talking, one thing that comes to mind is my first baptism as a deacon 46 years ago. I was at St. Paul's in North Canton. That was my diaconate assignment. And my first baptism were 10 babies.
Oh, my.
And, of course, that was back then, 46 years ago. I was newly ordained deacon, really didn't have a clue of what was going on. And I remember all those babies cried, because when one starts crying, the other one's, it's a chain reaction. But for some reason, it kind of got me prepared for the noise and the cacophony that goes on sometimes at your big masses where there's a lot of children.
Yeah.
And so you kind of could focus a little bit more because you're used to hearing that noise. And nowadays, unfortunately, in many of our churches, we don't have the noise of the little kids and the babies, which is really not a good thing, but it's an opportunity for us to cultivate young families. And I would imagine through baptism, through marriage preparation, through those sacraments, that we come in contact with young people. I would imagine you had a lot of contact with young people as a deacon. What were some of those experiences that helped you understand how important that was?
Oh, for sure. Being in downtown Canton was a great blessing. I got involved with our CCD programs, youth ministry. I helped with our confirmation class, prepare them for the sacrament of confirmation and the retreat. But also we started a young adult group, really working with the DRE there in Canton. She saw a need for this, and she was right. So we brought in a number of young adults, some just starting out in marriage, some raising children already, some waiting to bring their children into the world. And it's just a joy to be with them and hear their stories and be able to form relationships, because then they're asking you to baptize their children and come over for dinner. And, I agree with you. It really is sad today that we don't hear the pitter-patter of children in church. I would encourage parents, bring them to church. If they start crying, it's okay. That's another thing. Being up there and preaching, I've had a great experience and great practice with that, and the noise from the congregation, from the pews. It's all good. It shows, again, that our church is alive, and we need that.
What would you encourage young people who might be considering discerning about a vocation? What would you like to give them as some advice?
You have to pray. You have to have an open dialogue, an open conversation with God. If you don't have that, you'll never find the answers that you need. But with that also, you do need good, solid people you trust in your life to sit down and talk to. Maybe your parents, a sibling, a priest, a deacon, a sister, a friend, whoever it may be. Somebody that you trust to say, I really have this idea about priesthood, about religious life, and I don't know where to take it. Because just talking that out really answers some questions. So I would say prayer, and you got to be surrounded by people that you trust and that support you.
And it's basically a ministry of service, as we're going to be talking in just a few moments about priesthood really is a ministry of service. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Did you know that the Catholic Echo magazine is delivered 10 times per year to 52,000 Catholic households in Northeast Ohio? That is more than 150,000 people. And the Catholic Echo website, catholicecho.org, has been averaging 30,000 views per month since it launched in February 2023. Advertise your business, special event, or service with the Catholic Echo in print or online. Email catholicecho@youngstowndiocese.org. Advertising discounts are available for Catholic institutions, as well as for businesses that commit to 5 or 10 issues in a year. Email catholicecho@youngstowndiocese.org or visit the advertising tab at catholicecho.org for more information.
Wondering what happened to timely Catholic news in the Diocese of Youngstown? It's at catholicecho.org. Sign up for the email newsletter while you're there to have Catholic news delivered to your inbox.
Welcome back to our show. I'm talking with Father William Wainio. We're going to talk about priesthood now. Again, congratulations on your priesthood ordination yesterday at St. Columba. It's a great event for the Diocese of Youngstown. It's a great event for you, for your family, but it's also a great witness for us in the church to have young people interested in becoming a priest. That is something that you've prepared for not only 6-7 years in seminary formation, but it's something you've prepared your whole life.
That's true.
What was kind of like the glimmer back then when you thought about priesthood? What was that like in your mind? What was drawing you to that?
We still have a very Catholic family, and it was just our faith was very important to us. And I think that was the main key to understanding what I was thinking and being able to discuss it openly. I think that was important. Some people don't ever want to tell anybody that they're feeling called to priesthood or religious life. My family was very supportive. They continue to be very supportive. So that was one of the easy things. I didn't have to try and hide or change my thoughts and feelings about being a priest. But also, I just loved being at church for the liturgies, for choir practice, for the preparation for liturgies. I loved being in the worship space. I loved being with the people. And I think that just nurtured a whole different sense of community for me. Church was not just somewhere I went on Sunday, spent an hour and left and didn't go back until the following Sunday. But I was there multiple times a week because it was more of a community aspect.
Sure.
And I think we've lost some of that. COVID didn't help any, but we've lost some of that. We need to build our parishes back into communities where people want to be.
Right. And you know, it is an opportunity to get to know people, and you have to like people. If you don't like people, then this is not the job for you.
Totally
you know.
correct.
And I think we have to like people with all of their foibles, with all of their idiosyncrasies. It's just the way life is.
Right.
But we're all in this together, and that's what community is. No one is exactly alike. Even twins are not exactly alike. So everyone has their own uniqueness, and that's what we bring to the table when we gather, especially around the altar at Sunday Eucharist. What are you looking forward mostly, celebrating your first Mass today, but what are you looking forward to in your ministry as a priest that will continue to energize you, to keep that oil fresh on your hands, to give you the strength to go on in this time and place?
I'm just going to be joyful about everything that I do. Even in those difficult times, I'm going to try and find the joy. It's interesting that you bring up my first Mass of Thanksgiving this afternoon. On the front page of the worship aid, when you open it up, the very first page has a little note from me, and it says in there, no matter who you are, no matter the color of your skin or how much money you make or whatever, wherever I am serving as a priest, you are welcome in my community. Because I really do feel that way. I think people can find answers to their deep-rooted questions, maybe their problems or their downfalls at Mass, in the Eucharist. Because what happens when we go to Eucharist? We have an interaction. We experience the risen Lord. What better person to turn to for help in our times of need, answers to questions, answers about faith? So I want to make sure that I remain joyful in my ministry in hopes that it will lead others to church and say, he looks pretty happy. It must be a nice place to be. Because I just think people they don't really understand, I don't think, what's happening. And they're so overtaken by the culture around them that our faith, and not just Catholic Christians, but faiths of all denominations, are just losing people.
Well, one of the things that immediately comes to my mind is that church should be like home. And I remember going back as you were talking about my own family life and how my parents were extremely involved in the parish and in the church. And it was almost like their second home. And that's what the church really, the community is all about.
Absolutely.
It's gathering with people that become your sisters and brothers
Absolutely.
in Christ. And how unfortunate some places are where they don't welcome people. Those places that aren't open and welcoming tend to close and tend to not have life and ministry going on. So why is it important for us to always be open to everyone? Because that's who we are as church.
Absolutely. And as you were saying that, again, I was thinking of my own family. You know, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my Wainio grandparents, it was always anybody was welcome around the kitchen table, right? And it didn't matter. Grandma and Grandpa would wait to eat dinner until everyone made sure there was enough food and everyone had eaten. That's what we do at the liturgy, too. We should see that altar, as magnificent as it is, we should see it like our dining room and kitchen tables, where we gather around it not only to share a meal that sustains us, but also to talk about our day, to support others in times of distress or discomfort, to support each other, to share stories. That's really what the liturgy is all about. And if we look at the history of the church, first century after the time of Jesus, they were having Mass and celebrating the Eucharist at home, around a wooden table, in the dining room, in fear that they would be, persecuted for their beliefs. We've come a long way, thank God, but we have to remember where we came from. And you're absolutely right. We need to encompass everybody around that table, not just the people that look like us, not just the people that act like us, and bring everyone together and say, this is a place where you are loved and where we want to help. We want to help you. We want to, as Pope Francis says, accompany you on this journey of faith. I would not have gotten this far if people wouldn't have brought me in and accompanied me, and I want to give that back to the people that look to me for, as a priest now in my ministry, that look to me for help.
We know that the young priests nowadays and many of the priests nowadays have multiple assignments.
Sure.
That's just the reality. So how, in a nutshell, will you continue to minister to all those different people in those multiple parishes in which you will serve?
I think one of the biggest things I learned both in seminary and from the trusted pastors I've been assigned with over the last few years, I have to take care of myself first. Because if I'm not healthy and I'm not caring for myself, I can't help anybody else. I'm not trying to be selfish by any means, but if I'm not in the right state or I'm sick or not healthy, how am I going to help anyone else? I plan to just take my time and do what needs to be done and just remember that I need to care for myself in order to care for others. It's going to be the importance of taking a day off a week, but also being on those days where you're in the office or around the parish, being visible to people, being there, being welcoming, like open door policy, if you will. You need to talk, I'm here. I just think that it's been my experience that we have had some priests across the board, not just, locally or anything like that, but that have just kind of shut themselves in. And the only thing they thought they had to do was Mass on Sunday. Well, I think also that kind of pushed people away. People have turned to the church in difficult times, and there was really nobody there to kind of help and support them.
Sure.
So I think, you have to be visible to the people, and like you just said, multiple parish buildings or parish assignments, you have to try and be visible to everybody. So maybe that means, a day at this parish, a day at that parish, a day at parish 3, and then back. You have to split your time. You have to manage a calendar well. Those things I thankfully have the skills to do, so I'm lucky on that aspect. But I think really it comes down to I also have to take care of myself, my spiritual and physical needs, in order to help other people with their spiritual needs.
Amen. Father William Wainio, thank you for your presence on our show. And
Thanks,
again,
Father.
Congratulations on
Thank
your
you.
newly ordained priesthood. We wish you well. We know you'll do well, and you will bless those who will bless you.
Thank you, Father.
For more information, you can go to catholicecho.org. The Catholic Echo podcast is a production of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Youngstown in cooperation with Cumulus Media Youngstown. I'm your host, Father Jim Corda. Have a blessed day, and may God be with you.